All right. Hello and welcome to the Deep Dive Lab. This week we have Mumpta Chattery, who is the Chief Experience Officer and co founder at PRUs Solutions, a boutique consultancy that helps leaders welcome change so their organizations can succeed at change. Mumtaz has over 15 years of consulting experience working with companies in higher education, energy, mining, machinery, and financial services, and she knows what it takes to build change resilient organizations and change ready leaders. Outside of work, she is a mom, a wife, a cat lover, and a shopaholic. And she loves getting outdoors as much as possible in Vancouver, which is where she lives. Mumtaz, thank you for joining us here in the show today.
Thanks, Jacinta. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah. I mean, we just spoke about the weather because you mentioned you love going out in Vancouver. You love hiking?
Yeah, hiking, biking, camping, all the things outdoors as much as possible. I've got a young family,
Mm-hmm.
so we like to try to get out as much as possible and have fun.
Yeah. What's the best hiking place that you've been?
Oh, that's a tough one. There's some
Mm-hmm.
really great ones. Um, Probably a couple in Whistler that we've been to, and kind of mid to intermediate challenging ones that have been nice. Can't
There
remember
you
the names of
go.
them off the top of my head. I'm
Yeah.
extremely forgetful. Yeah, and there have been a few in and around Whistler and
Yeah.
Squamish area that have been
Oh,
pretty
yeah.
nice.
Whistler's beautiful in the winter too.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
You, when I lived in Vancouver, went to Whistler all the time. It was almost like this beautiful snow globe. It's picture
yeah,
perfect.
yeah. It is. It is really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So today we will explore the world of change management. But before that, let's explore a little bit more about your story. I know we initially actually met when you became my mentor when I was doing my MBA in SFU in Vancouver last year. And I remember one of the first times that we met, you took me over to the country club and we spoke for I think, oh God, like 2.5 hours. You're almost late to your next meeting. I was just so drawn at how passionate you were about change and your reason to go into this field. So could you share us a little bit more about your story and journey to how you developed this passion for change and now basically co-founded Pradulus?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been in change management now for about 15 years and sort of fell into the field. Um, I certainly didn't go to school to become a change manager.
Mm-hmm.
Early on in my career, I was in training and adult learning. Did a stint at the IT help desk as well. So, in that role of supporting and enabling people is how I sort of stumbled upon change management. And it was through a project early on in my career. It was a big project impacting the workplace that I was a part of. That is where I really learned what change management is and got to cut my teeth and gain some more experience in the change management space and world. So I was really fortunate because I was coached and mentored by seasoned change management consultants at the time, and learn the ropes, what's involved, and why change management is such a crucial part of big initiatives and projects. So, um, why I'm passionate about this space is because change management is all about people. It's about focusing on the people side of change and enabling that people power. I always say change power equals people power. Um, to make sure that change not only gets enabled, but sticks and stays for the long term. And that's often the miss with big changes inside organizations is that they sort of drum up all this enthusiasm and who hoo-ha about the change, but neglect the people side and how people are going to have to adapt and adopt the change, and help and play that crucial role in actually seeing the results and benefits. So that's why I'm
Mm-hmm.
passionate about it, because I get to work with people in very dynamic situations. Change almost always brings a lot of emotion, because people don't actually fear the change itself. They fear things like loss, they fear things like change in status, change in teams and relationships and roles. So it's all that my team and firm helps with is how do you identify, assess those people related changes with big projects and initiatives that organizations carry out, and then how do you support that people side through good change management interventions. So that could involve things like communications, leadership alignment, so getting leaders on board with the change so they can support their teams in turn. Training efforts are usually a large part of change management activities, and so that's kind of what my day and my role kind of looks like and why I'm in the space.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. There's a lot of touch points there. I think I want to start off from the very beginning, which is the understanding of change management. And you mentioned it is about people. But if you were to, let's say, summarize in a really simple sentence, what is change management?
Change management is enabling the people side of change.
Mm,
Essentially and fundamentally, it's understanding who is impacted by change
mm-hmm.
and how they're impacted, and working to address those needs and expectations of the different stakeholders that are involved in change. Anyone who's affected by it, it could be internally and externally to the organization. So
Right.
fundamentally, change management is about enabling the people side of change.
And I think a lot of companies forget about this change part. They're so fixated on the technical sides, especially with digital transformation, exacerbated by the pandemic. All organizations are now starting to be more digital, which is
Yes.
great, but they forget about the people piece.
Yes.
So, why do you think it is so important to have effective change management strategies?
So, research has proven over and over again that the more effective change management is, the more successful you will be in delivering and sustaining your change. In fact, research from leading change management training and research firm called ProSci indicates that you will be 6 times more successful in delivering the results and benefits of your change if you employ an effective change management program. So it's pretty
Mm-hmm.
stark, it's pretty impactful that if you really focus on the people side of change, you can be more successful. Research again from ProSci also shows that if you look at kind of the 3 measures of success for projects, which is on time, within scope, and within budget, when you employ change management and employ change management strategies as part of your project, you're more likely to deliver your project on time, within scope, and within budget. So there's a pretty big imperative for leaders to focus on the people side of change. It also helps you de risk your implementation from a people perspective. So,
Ooh.
change, like I mentioned, brings a lot of stress and confusion and anxiety. But if you focus on the people side, you can help people through improved communication, through improved and increased productivity, reduced stress levels in the organization. So, all those people related benefits are things that you'll reap as a result of effective change management as well.
Could you give an example of a management strategy?
Yeah. So, the one that comes to mind to me right now is one that's I'm working on a project with a mining company who's implementing a big enterprise resource planning system called SAP. And as part of that implementation and transformation, it's going to affect every part of how they do work, from the way maintenance technicians at the mine site carry out maintenance activities and maintain and uh, repair equipment and machinery to the way finance teams conduct their financial closing activities and reporting activities. So change management helps you understand what the extent and level and degree of those changes is going to be and come up with targeted strategies to support people through that change. So our change management strategy is comprised of a number of different streams, some of which include, hey, let's engage with the maintenance department to make sure that they're fully aware of what's going to be changing for them, help them prepare through good communications, leadership, and training. And then similarly with your finance teams, right? Hey, here's what's changing for you in your world of finance, and here are the things you need to know. Here are the tools, the support that's available to help you be more effective in that
Mm-hmm.
future state. So that's what change management strategies involve is that understanding and addressing the people side of change. We're not the architects of change as change management consultants. That's typically your business leaders, your project managers, program managers, others who design and decide what changes the organization is going to undertake, and it's usually tied back to overall business strategy. We come in once you've made those key decisions, those strategic decisions as change consultants to say, okay, now that you've decided upon the change that you're trying to make here and some of the results and benefits you're driving towards, we'll help you get there by equipping and properly informing people through the process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I do want to comment on one thing. I love how you mentioned that you have targeted strategies for different groups or different stakeholders, and I think that's a really key part. Oftentimes, when an organization makes change, they just deliver the same communication piece to everybody, but it might not necessarily tackle each group. So I do want to. There's a lot of questions here that I want to ask now.
Sure.
Number one, how do you effectively communicate the value of a project? Because oftentimes people can be quite reticent to change. So,
hmm
how do you deliver the value of this project effectively to different groups?
Yeah. So I think the most important skill in change management is empathy and understanding. So we always start in our change management work with understanding what our stakeholders' needs, expectations, questions, and concerns are, and then base our strategies, our tactics, our activities on that, right? So if we're going to engage with a maintenance technician at a mine site, that's going to look different based on their needs and expectations than someone, like I mentioned before, in a finance role sitting in a corporate office, right? They're going to have
Hmm.
different communication needs and expectations. So it always starts by understanding what those unique needs and expectations are, and then using that to build your tactics, your activities. And it's going to look different for even within those groups for leaders versus employees. They'll need a little bit different levels of support. Middle managers are often caught in the middle of all of
Hmm.
that, right? To have that, expectation from senior leadership around what needs to be delivered. They also need to be supporting their employees, their direct reports through the change. So yeah, so it starts by that empathy, understanding, meeting people where they are, and then forming a change strategy that addresses that.
Right. And I love how you also mentioned top down and bottom up too. Ineffective change oftentimes is just communication to the top level managers, and you expect everyone else to also understand. But I love how you brought the two together to really make it more cohesive communication. But more than that, I'm very certain that you've experienced a lot of resistance.
Yes.
So, how do you deal with the resistance? And especially, I would hear a lot of stories from like legacy employees where they have always been doing the same thing for years, 20, 30 years. And a new change management agency comes in, tells them that they have to make some change. I don't want to do this. I've been doing this forever, and it's what works for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you deal with that and try to manage the different employees too and not to upset anybody?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, with change, I can't ever promise that you're not going to upset people. You will upset
Hmm.
people. It's how you respond and react in those situations that makes the difference. And to me, resistance isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's actually a good thing because I see it as an opportunity to deepen and enrich your relationships with your employees. So when you see someone sort of characteristically resisting a change, it's an opportunity to find out more about what they care about, what their values are, what their needs are, what their expectations are, and try to address that through your change management interventions. And usually that's done through leadership. So a lot of our firm's work is working with leadership at different levels to train them to recognize resistance and how to address it, how to overcome it, and how to support people through that journey. And it almost always starts with leaders first addressing their own internal resistance to change, getting what they need. I liken it to the metaphor of putting on your oxygen mask in the airplane.
Mm.
You know how the flight attendants will tell you to do that. They'll tell you to put your own mask first, own oxygen mask on first before you go out and
Hmm.
help others. It's the exact same in change management. As a leader, you need to help yourself first, get what you need to get, stable and secure and in full alignment around the change and what benefits and results it's expected to deliver for the organization, and then help your team along that change curve and journey.
Hmm. Do you only train sort of leadership teams and expect them to sort of teach the rest of the employees to maintain the culture, or do you also then train the employees too, or do you select change agents?
Yeah, it's usually a multi-pronged approach. It starts with your executives, making sure at that executive level, that senior leadership level, they're aligned on the vision, the benefits, the objectives of the change. With managers, it's that training and support and then toolkits around how to be a good and effective change leader, how to work through resistance. We talked about how to equip people how to properly communicate in times of change. And then with employees as well, how they can be more resilient in times of change, where you do see those early adopters of change, enlisting them in change agent networks and as advocates for the change is all part of a change management strategy as well.
Hmm. Can I catch on what you mentioned about advocate for change? So I understand, if we're like working with a small organization, it may not be as difficult to just select, the leaders and certain people you can identify really well. But when you work with a really large organization, let's say even, hundreds, thousands of employees, how do you effectively select the appropriate change agents to advocate for a change and to not only effectively deliver the change management strategy, but to also maintain this culture to make it a sustainable change?
Yeah. Um, so change agents are typically selected for qualities like empathy, like I mentioned
Mm.
before, um, business acumen and knowledge of sort of the work groups that they come from, so they can bring that to bear, because that's good input and feedback to change teams, to project teams around how this impacts different business units or departments. They're usually very strong communicators and influencers, so they don't have to have a formal leadership role. They could be informal leaders in their own right. They're usually the go-to people inside departments and teams who people just naturally go to because they always have, the answer to their questions or the info or point them in the right direction or connect them with the right folks. They're those connectors inside the organization that you want to look for. And they're also, I would say, agile. because they know how to gather feedback and collect feedback continuously through the process and adapt how they work, how they engage with different stakeholder groups. Because you learn more as you engage with people, find out more about their needs and expectations, and you do have to continuously adapt your approaches in relation to that. So yeah, I would say it's kind of those four key things or three key things is being a
Mm-hmm.
empathetic and active listener, being a strong communicator and influencer, and then having that ability to quickly adapt and think on your feet, and refine and fine tune your approaches as you learn more
Mm-hmm.
about the stakeholders and the impacts of the change.
Have you ever experienced a case where you receive a lot of resistance from maybe even leadership or even the change agents or these connectors as well?
Um, it can happen. Generally, when we're coming into a change initiative or project, we're looking for kind of key success factors. So we're looking for strong sponsorship. We're looking for a very compelling vision for the change. And we're looking for at least a basic outline of goals, objectives, and benefits. And it's when you don't have those three key things that you're going to encounter a lot of resistance to change. And it's in projects that are sort of pet projects, leadership pet projects, where you see a lot of resistance to change, where it's just like a leader, I just want to do this because it's of
Mm,
interest to me and me alone, not to the remaining stakeholders in the organization. So that's where you'll encounter a lot of resistance. Um, Projects with kind of missing those three key factors: no strong sponsorship, so someone really actively and visibly sponsoring the change, being that vocal advocate, building coalitions across the organization. Projects that lack that strong, compelling vision for the change, painting that big picture, linking it back to strategy, linking it back to business goals, and then just that third piece, right, of not having. I'm forgetting what the third piece was now that
the
I
basic
mentioned.
outline of the goals.
The basic outline of the goals and objectives, yes,
Mm-hmm.
and you know how you're going to measure success in the end. Um, how will you know you've been successful with this change is kind of one of the first questions we ask. And if they don't have a good enough answer to that, sometimes it's a client and a project we step away from, quite frankly, because we know it's going to be very, very challenging from a change management perspective, and likely not successful.
What do you look for when you're looking for a great metric to measure success?
Um, the people side metrics. And
Mm,
almost always the goals and objectives are people related. No one solely drives a project or a change for financial results alone, right? Or if they are, a lot of the times those financial results and benefits or quantitative benefits are highly people dependent, right? It's dependent on people
right.
actually adopting, using, integrating those changes into their day-to-day work. So those are the kinds of things we look for, and we can help our clients, get more clear around those benefits as well, because we like to drive what's called benefits-led change, and work backwards from what's the benefit that you're trying to drive here. Okay, here are all the enabling changes, and people side support we need to undertake.
Right. Do you have maybe a case study that you could share that, from the start, it may have been quite challenging, and then through it, you work through all these change management strategies, and now it is going great, or you're maintaining it? So like a story that you can share, maybe a public story or anything like that.
Sure, yeah. Maybe I'll share the story of a credit union that we worked with a few years ago who was embarking on a large scale business transformation. They were planning to go national across Canada. And as such, they had a portfolio of different changes they needed to undertake to be successful with that national expansion. So initially, they felt overwhelmed, fatigued with all of the
Mm,
change that they had to make, and not having the structure, the frameworks, um, the culture, perhaps in place to help support and enable that change. So we came in for nearly 2 years to help support them
wow.
through that journey. So help them build a roadmap for the change, outline some of those key benefits, gave them a change methodology and framework that they continue to use today for all, in progress and future change initiatives. They'll always follow sort of a multi-step approach to change especially when it impacts people. And then we trained folks inside their organization in good change management strategies. Some went through formal change training, others participated in training as part of a community of practice. So we really helped them to build that culture of change inside the organization because we knew they could employ, 10, 15, 20, 30 consultants, change consultants to help them get it done, but they wouldn't have been able to, sustain and really make that transformation a part of how they continued to work. So they really
Mm.
invested in building that change capable culture, change capable leaders, and ultimately resulted in their successful launch and national expansion.
Right. I do also want to catch on the word fatigue. So, change
Mhm.
fatigue is a thing
Yes.
where change management is already happening. It's been a while, and employees or individuals are starting to get tired and they're no longer enthusiastic about the change. They may have lost the value and the goal and the light at the end of the tunnel. How, especially with a 2 year project, how do you manage change fatigue?
Yeah. I'd say that it means keeping a constant pulse on your people. Um, People experience change fatigue when change is poorly managed.
Mm.
So, number one, it starts by using a good change methodology or framework or process to work through that change. And then, two, it's about maintaining that pulse on your people. How are people adapting? How are they receiving the information? Are they getting the info and support that they need through the change process? Because in the end, change is a process. It's not an event. It doesn't start, the moment you announce your change and say, "Hey, woohoo, we're changing the organization, and here's what you need to know." It actually is a journey that you need to take your people through, and it involves continuous communication, continuous engagement, making those feedback channels available and opening those up for people to channel their feedback, ask questions, ask for support where needed. So that's, you know, how you, the most successful way to go about it.
Yeah, and another thing that you mentioned as well is actually that two-way communication. Communication isn't just one way. You enforcing the change to people. Your what you mentioned about feedback channel and allowing people to share their opinions. I think that's where, individuals start feeling like they're being heard. So that is exactly what I think of like effective communication. I've heard of stories out there where change management was, I would use the word enforced upon. It's forced upon you, and that is not a great communication. That's not an effective way. That's just announcing information, right? And so I think I really appreciate how you mentioned that there are these different channels, and also you mentioned the frequency of touch points too, which is you touching base every single time. It's a process, it's not a one-time thing. You're with them throughout the entire journey.
Mhm. Yeah, sometimes we're communicating that we don't have anything to update and still communicating, right? Because it
Yeah.
gives people that consistency, that transparency around what's happening, helps them feel involved, right? Um, so those are ways that we use at least to combat change fatigue.
Hmm.
Um, I think with the pandemic, um, change fatigue was experienced at unprecedented levels for
For
most
sure.
organizations. So it's also important to invest in good mental health supports and programs for employees to help them build up that resiliency reserve and energy for change ultimately.
Hmm. How different are the strategies pre and post pandemic now that we're living in a more digital world as compared to before? How different are they?
Yeah, so a lot of our projects now are hybrid projects,
Mm,
meaning the people, the stakeholder groups, the leaders, the different employee groups we're working with are dispersed, not co-located, working, different schedules and ways, not always in the office. So I'd say the incidence of online meetings, online collaboration platforms has certainly increased. So we're using things like Teams and Slack and Zoom a lot more, a whole scale
mm-hmm.
lot more than we did pre-pandemic. There were companies and clients that we worked with before who were very traditional and old school, and were like, nope, everyone's in the office 5 days a week. We work 9 to 5 every day, and this is how we work and this is how we function. And now all of that got blown away through the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic, and a lot of those companies have adopted hybrid or even fully remote work strategies, workplace strategies to accommodate all that change. So it means
Right.
in the change world, we have to engage people a little bit differently, right? So you have to offer both live in-person events and opportunities to engage with the change, but also online, asynchronous ways for people to engage, and learn more and connect the dots on change. So yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
On the idea of fatigue as well, digital or what we call Zoom fatigue is also a thing too, which I am sure you also have to deal with, not only within your team, but also with your clients.
Yeah.
Do you experience a lot of that digital Zoom fatigue with clients where they don't really want to express as much? And also the connection, the empathy is a little bit harder to get over online. How do you deal with this problem?
Yeah. There's a term that I really like called meeting-itis. And I think we
Ooh,
all caught a bit of meeting-itis through the pandemic, well, and justifiably so, because
hmm,
everything that we had to do through the pandemic, for those that work in office-based roles, had to do everything online. So everything had to be a meeting. Even if you had to ask a question, it had to be
yep.
a meeting in order to talk to that person, right? So we developed this condition called what I call meetingitis, and it's not something that's coined by me. I read this somewhere online, so I love it. And I think now, post pandemic, we're starting to sort of peel away from that. At least in my work, I help clients sort of claw back from that and discover that not everything needs to be a meeting. Maybe we
Yeah.
can just pick up the phone or go, down the hall and talk to that person and ask them that question. It could be a quick chat message instead. A document doesn't have to be discussed in a meeting. It could be emailed around, and then, you could send another email a couple days later to check in whether people have questions or feedback or input, right? Like there's
Mm,
different ways to now collaborate so we don't have to cause that Zoom fatigue and have a meeting for every single little thing that we need to do as part of
yeah.
our workday. Yeah, and other things I also recommend to clients is not every meeting needs to be an hour. I've actually
Mm,
defaulted my meetings in Outlook to be 30 minutes. And if I can't
mhm. Mm,
go through what I need to go through or review with my team. So it's rare that you need an hour for a meeting unless it's some big topic or decision.
mhm,
So that helps a little bit, gives people a bit of a break. And I mean, it's nice to have cameras on in certain opportunities and meetings and engagement opportunities with folks, but you don't always have to, especially with big group meetings. You don't have to have 20, 30, 50, 100 people with their cameras on, having to experience Zoom fatigue. Maybe it's best to simply have the presenter or the main presenters have their cameras on instead. So different strategies depending on the client organization, the culture, the environment can help to combat some of that Zoom fatigue.
mhm, mhm. Before you mentioned that change management is a way to de-risk. And I want to catch on that because oftentimes people think change is a risky thing because you're doing something all the time and you're doing some change. I don't know what the outcome is. So there is that risk there. But I like how you mentioned de-risk though. So sometimes organizations don't change. That could be a risk. Like for example, like Kodak, right? That the fact that they didn't pivot, now they filed for bankruptcy, a Blockbuster to Netflix as well. So I would love to catch on to explain a little bit more about what you mean by change management, de-risks, risks in general.
Yeah. So there are, of course, as you mentioned, risks that come with change. So there's the risk of failure, right? That you don't actually meet the goals or objectives of the change you set out to meet. So that's one way that change management helps de-risk that, because it helps you focus on the people side. So the people enabled portion of the change is effectively managed and addressed. Um, Change management also brings risk in the form of, like we talked about before, fatigue, exhaustion, effects on mental health and wellness inside your organization. So change management helps de-risk that as well by, again, focusing on people and making sure they're front and center in the process. And if you know that your change is causing fatigue, exhaustion, you can reel it back a bit. You can slow down, you can pace and sequence it so it's a little bit more digestible, a little bit more, you know, accommodating within the environment inside the organization and for your culture. So those are some of the ways change management helps to de-risk change. Yeah, and I would say that, that those are kind of the things that we focus on as part of our work at Pragilus.
Hmm. What are the main challenges that you experience when you're dealing with change?
So usually, lack of communication or miscommunication is the number one thing with
Hmm.
change. People don't know what's happening or why we're changing or how this is going to affect them. And so that miscommunication risk is generally mitigated with good change management because you're actively communicating, you're addressing stakeholder needs as part of the process, etc. Um, and I'm trying to remember and come back to your question, Jacinta. So can you repeat it for
Yep.
me?
So, yeah, for sure. So, with change management, sort of how do you manage all of the change and the risks when it comes to appropriate change management techniques?
Mhm. Yes, we talked about miscommunication as a risk. Leadership showing up and modeling the change is a big risk as well, because you need those active, visible leaders inside the organization being out front and center with employees, speaking with them directly about the benefits of the change, the risks of not changing, what it means for the organization and that bigger picture. So yeah, those are kind of the risks, and how to kind of overcome them through change management.
Hmm. With what you mentioned about communication and effective communication, I know you mentioned about frequency and trying to understand their value and delivering that. What are the common pitfalls that leaders do that allows them to sort of ineffectively convey messages?
Lack of communication. So
Yep.
thinking that the once and done, technique will work once, at the start of the change, announcing it, and then kind of wiping their hands clean of it that, okay, everybody should know because we've done it once and we made sure everyone was there and they heard the message. Change, like I said before, is a process, not an event. So you have to
Hmm.
constantly and continuously be communicating and engaging with your workforce, with your employees and teams. So that's one aspect of communication that often gets missed is actually communicating actively and continuously. Um, and the words matter. Um, so choosing the right words that are aligned with your culture and your values as you communicate is crucially important. So when I'm working with leaders, I help them, form and formulate those communications. Often I'm ghost writing on their behalf, saying, "Hey, here's the things we'd like you to say, but put it into your own language, your own words, your way of speaking, so that it comes across as genuine and transparent. Some leaders need more coaching on that aspect than others. But people want to hear directly from their leader. So more often than not, I'm kind of working in the background to equip those leaders with the things they need to be effective change leaders and communicators, and letting them then run with it from there. And if they encounter resistance, if they are running into challenges or risks or issues with change, then we come in to help address that.
I also want to catch on what you said about communication from leaders and choosing the appropriate words. So, I think authenticity is a big thing when it comes to leadership, but some people might mistake authenticity as just complete truthfulness without tact.
Hmm.
So, I'm curious to hear, what is authenticity to you?
To me, it's when someone speaks in a way that reflects their values and value system. Um, and the more transparency you can provide, the better and more authentic you'll come across with your employees and with your team. So to me, that's how you build trust and authenticity is by one, reflecting and showcasing your values when you speak and when you communicate, when you act and what you do. And two, it's being as transparent as possible, even saying, "Hey, I don't know the answer to that question yet," or "This is something that I'm not able to share yet, but I'm hoping to have more soon to you too," is good enough for people to know that you're being transparent in the process and as authentic as possible.
And about trust, I think that is so important. That is key in effective change as well. Um, there's a research study that shows essentially trustworthy leaders, you would need two things. You would need authenticity and you would need integrity.
Hmm.
Authenticity is what you mentioned. I love how you defined it as, you are sharing and doing things according to your values. But what is integrity to you? So integrity oftentimes can be defined as doing what you actually say. Is that the same for you too?
It is, yeah.
Mm.
Being true to your word.
Yep.
It's again showing up in your values and your value system, demonstrating that values based leadership. Um, and that's how you build trust. I think it also involves an element of vulnerability. When you're,
Mm.
vulnerable with your employees, with your teams, they'll trust you more. They'll come to you more. They'll, also, let down their guard in front of you, right? And be more vulnerable in front of you. And that's how you build strong relationships and bonds with the people that you work with, right? So
Hmm.
to me, that's what, authenticity means, what being an effective leader means.
Right, right. I was listening to this podcast by Work Life by Adam Grant. I don't know if you know, but
Hmm.
it's a excellent podcast. He was interviewing Brene Brown on vulnerability,
Hmm.
and she mentioned about the fact that leaders find it really difficult sometimes to balance this idea that they have to be really strong but also show some vulnerability. How much do I show? I'm authentic, but it's really hard to balance all of this. How do you think we can balance all three, which is I'm strong, I have the integrity, I'll do what I'll say, I'm authentic, I have my values, but also I'll be vulnerable with you so you can build trust with us.
Hmm. So I think it goes back to values-based leadership, right? What is it that you value? And showcasing that in the way you show up as a leader, right? Yes, vulnerability is hard. Not everyone can be vulnerable at work, depending on how you've grown up and some of your life experiences. Um, but you'll notice that once you have enough trust built up in your teams and your coworkers, it's actually pretty easy to be vulnerable and to still be seen as a respected leader and team member. To me, vulnerability not just builds trust, but it also garners respect. And I think you can have a healthy balance of both vulnerability and sort of that direction setting and strong leadership, um, and learn how to sort of balance those three elements well when you are grounded in your values and know who you are as a leader.
Hmm. Don't mean to put you on the spot here, but could you give an example of maybe a story or maybe even a statement of how leaders can be vulnerable and that could also then lead to respect?
Mhm. Um, so I'll give an example of a team member I was working with. She was on the consulting team side with me, and was going through a really rough patch in her personal life. Um, and I was not aware of what was happening, but I could see it in the way she was showing up at work because she was getting really frustrated with kind of, normal day to day mundane things, just expressing frustration and anger and, you know, um, stress and showing up in that way. And one day it resulted in her just breaking down in
Mm,
tears in front of a couple of other leaders on the project team. And what I did in that moment was just stop and said, "Hey, this is a situation we need to address ASAP." And really just let her talk and express what was going on, what was happening, and then asked her how best we could support her as a leadership team. So it's about recognizing those things, right? And being
yeah.
attuned to that and being and knowing that you always have to make time for that because that creates time and space and success for you later on. And I knew that kind of like it was just like 5-10 minute intervention to just stop what we were doing, focus on her, give her the attention and support she needs to get well, to get better, and to be back in that, shape to help us on the project, right? Because change is a team effort. It's not done all by one person. You need, different people with different skill sets, backgrounds, life experiences to help make that change sustainable. And so, yeah, made sure we stopped, made that investment to get her well, to get her what she needed, so that she could fulfill her role more effectively as part of the project moving forward.
And I think you also set the culture right then and there, where you as a leader, you said, no, this is a priority right now. In this 5 to 10 minutes, it is a priority. I want to attend to her. I've heard lots of horror stories out there. In consulting, actually, as you know, I'm sure you know, consulting life can be pretty challenging.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of consultants out there who would quite literally break down in tears, and they would have their manager say, "Yep, you can go to the bathroom and come
Hmm.
back." And that culture is instilled from the top too. So I appreciate that you as a leader put that very clear and say, you are a priority to me and I care about you.
Yeah, I always say the most difficult conversations are the best ones to have because you come away from that with learning a bit more about yourself, a bit more about the other person that's involved, and you ultimately learn and grow as an individual, right? And then you
Hmm.
build your own leadership skill as part of that. So yeah, yeah, I used to in the early part of my career shy away from those difficult conversations when I saw conflict and things like that at work. I just like ran the other way. Now I like go in there like head on, and I'm like, nope, this is something that we need to address. I need to address, and let's figure this out together and try to collaboratively work through, a resolution and success.
Hmm. Moving on towards the sort of the final parts of the interview, we see change management change over the years, especially even pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. Now we are reliant on technology. We're seeing a lot of development in AI, in all these other tech tools. I have my other episodes where I speak about AI, and we explore this really crazy rabbit hole, and that it's going to change a lot of the work, the things that people do. The one thing that tech, or at least AI right now, can't change is feelings. They can't replace feelings of humans. But I'm curious to hear what you think. What is the future of change management amidst all of this change, rapid change in technology?
So I think the future in change management is going to be data driven. So I think we're going to be able to pull more data and insights from online and digital systems about people that we weren't able to do before more as easily or as effectively as now with all these tools available. Things like pulse surveys, the ability to um, check in on your teams regularly through chat, through Microsoft's coming up with so many different technologies to measure that engagement and that health of your team. So that's one way I think change management is going to change. Um, I also like kind of building on that, it's going to be more digital as well. So our firm in particular, we're looking at ways to build sort of change dashboards or adoption dashboards online and then live, report on where we're at with different stakeholder engagement efforts. Where are we seeing sort of red or resistance inside the organization, that heat map of readiness or impact, making that available to leaders. So that's kind of the next domain of change management that we're exploring through different tools. Um, but I think the things that won't change about change management are it's always human centric. It's always
Hmm.
going to be about the human beings involved. That's why I don't think it's a domain or a career that's ever going to go away. There's always going to be change. So I think I have a career for life, hopefully. I don't think organizations are going to stop changing.
Yep.
So as such, they're always going to need change management support and help and expertise, um, especially the ones that are human centered, which I think most organizations are. They care about the people inside their teams and organizations. And if they do, then they'll manage change properly and appropriately. And yeah, I think, you know, um, change isn't going away.
Mhm.
So I think the um, incidences of change are going to increase. The volume, the intensity of change is increasing. So it's incumbent upon leaders and organizations to get better at it, to build change ready teams and leaders, and to, really make sure they have that dedication and focus on the people side of change.
Mhm. Thank you so much for such a great conversation today. I learned a
You're
lot
welcome.
about change management. So, thank you for joining us here in the show today.
Thanks. You're welcome, Jacinta. I really enjoyed the conversation too.
Thank you.